There's been a couple of them, but we think about customer relationship management and we think about customer data platforms. And those are the ones we typically refer to. And when we double click and we start looking into these systems, they tend to be static systems of records that have information around the users, right? So Salesforce was the first one to kind of like come around and coin customer relationship management. And for a really long time, what that actually meant was just a system of record where salespeople would track their sales funnel. And very static from that direction. Then we move into customer data platform. In fact, recently Segment was acquired by Twilio, right? So it's a customer data platform. And what a customer data platform does is integrate different parts of your marketing stack or your different systems and create a cohesive profile of the user. So that's the customer data platform. However, the customer data platform alone will just give you information. It's not taking any action. When we talk about intelligent data platforms, it's not only getting the information about that particular customer, but the system taking action around that information and around that data. So it gives companies the ability to integrate all these different systems, create a single view of the customer, and then start taking action and start taking conversation. I think a very interesting application for intelligent data platforms is conversational commerce, where companies get the ability to not only sell products to the customer, but have ultimately the ability of those end users start interacting with them and asking more questions. So to put it in an example, most of the internet to date is like going into an empty shop. You enter the shop, you see a ton of products, but there's no salesperson behind it. So if you want to get any recommendations, if you want to get any suggestions, you're kind of at a loss. And you gain certain things by having a wide variety of product, but you lose that personalization. What intelligent data platforms allows you to do is to bring that shopkeeper, to bring that salesperson back into the conversation by using artificial intelligence and machine learning and providing certain recommendations for the end user.
That's fantastic. And looks like, I mean, a lot of the intelligence that we're talking about comes through leveraging AI and ML and automation as being a key enabler in driving the intelligence behind it. And one of the things that, I mean, as investors, we see those terms get thrown around a lot. And I'm sure as founders, you probably hear a lot of those terms as well. Be interesting to understand like how much of these intelligent data platforms have AI, ML, and automation truly as an enabler. Are customers seeing consistent and clear ROI out of these automation pieces and out of the intelligence that you mentioned being built into that customer data platforms? And I think we got a little bit into examples, but maybe just share some examples of how you've seen these actually being used to drive better customer engagement and better customer journeys.
Yes, absolutely. So these terms get thrown around, right? Like you put AI right next to anything and somehow it used to make it special. Now I think it doesn't make it special. Like it kind of plays the opposite role because it has been overused in that aspect. When it comes to intelligent data platforms, to put it simply, again, I'll come back to the shopkeeper. I'll come back to the salesperson of the store. Like the most simple way of thinking about an intelligent data platform is think about a person engaging with your users. That person will interpret the data, and then based on the data, if it has been properly trained, if this person has been properly trained, it will take certain actions. It will give your user certain recommendations, which ultimately will allow them to sell more or for the user to buy more or to buy better because of what that is happening. So in an ideal world, we would be able to hire the entire world to do that, to interpret the data and to come up with some of the recommendations that we have. And in fact, that's what we've been doing with retail for the last, I don't know how many hundreds of years, right? However, as we move, it just doesn't become practical from a scale perspective to have a person behind every single transaction that is happening. And I think that is the part where AI and ML come into play. It's not 100% automation. There are, of course, certain parts where you can summon a human and get the assistance of a human in these intelligent data platforms. However, and you can automate up to 70 and 80%. So you talked about a couple of examples, or you asked for a couple of examples. One that comes to mind is some of the work that we've been doing with Coca-Cola. And probably, I mean, a lot of people are familiar with Coca-Cola. They have drank Coke or Pepsi at any point, right? Any of these CPG brands, water, et cetera, right? Like if you're not a soda drinker, you probably touched one of their products. And typically you go into a store, you grab this drink, and you don't think about how that drink got into that store. And I think it's important to notice that the process that goes behind getting that drink into the store is intensely complex, especially when you go into emerging markets. So in emerging markets, around 80% of the sales of these large consumer brands company happen through small mom and pop shops. So these mom and pop shops, think about, in India, there are about 30 million kiranas. In Latin America, you have around 4 million of these small mom and pop shops. And what they will do is they will contact, they will actually have a visit from one of the Coca-Cola salespersons 2 times a week in order to take an order. And that's typically what they do. And the reason they do that is because they negotiate the price, they negotiate certain promotions. There's a back and forth conversation that takes place with that salesperson. And that's how they built their business to business sales model. So they had tried to digitize it, because if you think about it, you're visiting 30 million, in India, or you're visiting 4 million stores 2 times a week. The cost starts adding up from that perspective, just to take an order and just to do the sale. So what an intelligent data platform allowed them to do from a conversational commerce perspective is to start automating that process. And the way they did this is they brought the shop owners, the shopkeepers, into a digital experience by allowing them to place orders via WhatsApp. And the intelligent data platform would personalize each of the recommendations of the products and would then engage in a back and forth conversation around prices. It would do some of the negotiation with some of these shopkeepers. And the results were incredible in that part. We not only saw a similar conversion rate than a physical person visit, but it also increased the average ticket size. So that meant that now you would have the same conversion rate, but that this company like Coca-Cola was actually selling more because of the intelligent data platform. So we started looking at that data and we said, okay, what's going on, right? Like how is this happening? Because in a way you have been able to recommend products better than a human being. And what we actually realized is that a lot of these sellers were arriving into the stores. They were sometimes in a rush, or they were not analyzing what other stores around were also buying. Like they would just come and with a normal catalog offer whatever they had to sell for the day. So it's also a great way of standardizing, but at the same time generating some patterns around these are what shops that are similar to yours are buying, and start providing recommendations. And that really drove that case forward. So now we're working with millions of stores that are placing orders in a recurring basis, and the intelligent data platforms keeps on learning and keeps on getting better from the algorithm, to the point that nowadays a lot of the orders, the store owner sometimes doesn't even check what is being recommended. They began to trust the algorithm to a certain extent that they just take the order. They just at the end of the day say, okay, this has been recommended. In the past, it has been a good recommendation. So whatever is suggestion is probably likely that I'll go ahead and sell that. So that's an example that we have there for Coca-Cola when it comes to how they've been able to leverage AI and ML when it comes to intelligent data platforms.
That's an amazing example, Javi. And I mean, there's two things to kind of pull out from that example. One of it, where you said that the AI has matured to the level where the shopkeepers don't even go and look down into what is being recommended, but trust the algorithms and just go and purchase it based on whatever it recommends. And that shows us that the level of AI has matured to the point where initially it was the machine recommends, but it still needs the human in the loop to kind of approve, understand and approve and really dive into like what is being picked and why it's being picked, to the level of where the machine is able to recommend things and the human pretty much just becomes like a signatory saying, yeah, sure, move forward with it, to eventually where it all gets driven through the machine. So it's definitely great to see a real life case study of how the AI has matured to that level. And then the second piece that also I found interesting in that example is when we talk about intelligent data platforms and building more human-like connections, a lot of it gets spoken in a B2C concept, where it's about how Facebook and Instagram and all of these social media applications can help predict your network graph and connect you with the right set of people and recommend things. Versus, I think the example that you mentioned of how Yalo is really setting the path forward for that to be applied in a B2B setting, which definitely becomes really interesting.
Yes, and I think it has a lot of applications beyond that case that I would put, right? So we've started to see that ordering is just the tip of the iceberg in these B2B relationships, because there's a lot of point of sale execution, even recommendations around how this salesperson, how this shopkeeper should be putting their products, how they should be selling those products, and it starts going further down the line. So B2B has a lot of potential in that regard. It's a show that it has been applied, but also retail. I mean, we also seen cases for retail where it has become extremely powerful, the intelligent data platforms, and really bridging the gap between the physical world and the experience that you used to take, that you used to have there, and the online world.
Yeah, awesome. I think, I mean, in terms of examples, this is something that would apply to pretty much every industry and sector out there. I want to go in a slightly, I would say, tangential direction. So we talked about how conversational commerce is a great example of an intelligent data platform. And one of the interesting aspects of what conversational commerce enables is this omni-channel approach, where it doesn't have to be just a website to a customer or a phone to a customer, but really opening it up to asynchronous ways of communication. And one of the interesting trends that we're seeing is how these multi-channel or omni-channel approaches are being used to really build digital connections at scale. Would be interesting, Javi, to just double click a little bit more into that conversational commerce side, and maybe talk about like why is this even more relevant and important for emerging markets to really be successful, especially as you think about, we talked about retail and financial services and other B2B workflows. Like, what is different about emerging markets that probably we don't see as much in the US, and maybe we should start seeing more in the US?
Yes. So I think that there are a couple of things there, right? You mentioned omni-channel, emerging markets as well, and kind of like how they can pave the way to what the future of commerce might look like. If we take a close look at China, I think at this point we would be foolish to say, hey, like they're less advanced than the US when it comes to commerce, right? And I think the fact that they were able to advance that fast was because they didn't have to displace all technology. So that's the beauty of emerging markets, that it allows to leapfrog existing technologies and kind of like take a tabla rasa approach when it comes to solving problems. So let me go back for a second around omni-channel. I think when companies a lot of the times talk about omni-channel and you start double clicking, you realize that in reality, they're mostly talking about multi-channel. And multi-channel is we are everywhere. Like we provide services everywhere, but the experience is highly inconsistent when you go from one channel to the other channel. And it's very different. You might visit a store, or you might talk through the phone, or you might do it via chat, but there's no sense of context as you move from one interface into the other interface. And that's the multi-channel approach. And I think it's the part that oftentimes frustrates end users, because they see the brand of a company as something unique, as a single entity, and they would expect that as they go through different entry points, they would have a consistent experience and the company would know who they are as they go through that. I think a lot of the times we're even at the point where even in that same conversation, and it might have happened to you, where even in that same phone conversation, they pass you from one department to the other and the context is lost and you have to kind of like start again, start all over again. So that's multi-channel. And omni-channel, what it really means is to be first where customers are, like to really adapt to the channels where the customers are. And second, to keep context and to maintain that record and that knowledge of what the user is doing at every step of the way. And what we've seen, especially in emerging markets, is that the place where customers, where end users tend to be, are messaging apps. They're spending around 84% of the time that they're spending inside of smartphone inside of a messaging app. The rest of the time they'll probably be in social media, and then other apps really not non-existing that much. 70% of the apps that do manage to get downloaded are uninstalled or unused 3 months after the first install or after the first engagement. So really, like what people are doing on their mobile mostly is messaging apps, and that's where they're spending a lot of the time. So what we've seen companies do in emerging markets is to leverage that and to start creating an omni-channel approach by being where their customers are, which tends to be these messaging apps, and to use that as a unifying tissue for the rest of the experiences. So one of the retailers, we work with a couple of retailers globally, including Walmart and some others. And one of the retailers that we work with, what they started doing is they started using the messaging channel to unify all of their experiences. So the experience looks something like this. As a user, you would show up to the store, and then you would connect to the Wi-Fi of the store. And on the Wi-Fi of the store, you would enter your phone number. By entering that phone number, you would get a message on your WhatsApp. And what that does, it identifies that particular user with their number, which sometimes already exists inside of their database, sometimes it doesn't, as visiting the store. So now the company knows Rashmi has visited the store and it's probably inside of the store. So they can trigger a specific message that can provide certain assistance for your experience inside of that store. Within a certain time period, if you don't buy a product, which is already linked to the point of system, and they would realize whether you bought something or not, you would get a notification or a reminder saying, hey, if you didn't find what you were looking for in the store, let's continue the conversation here. So you can move into the messaging channel to go there, and then start browsing through different products, which can take you then into the website. But instead of seeing a normal website, you would see a personalized website that is based on some of the products that you had already browsed or expressed interest. So that's a bit of how an omni-channel experience can look like. And if you say you added a couple of products to the cart, but you didn't end up buying because you got distracted, you could also get a reminder inside of the messaging channel, just so that you keep the thread. A lot of the times, I think if we think about the relationships that we have with friends, with family members, and we want to remember what we're talking about, we usually open the messaging app and just go to the conversation and scroll through the thread. I can bet you have probably done that a couple of times too. It's like, where did I leave it?
Yes.
Yes. So I think companies have that ability now of using the thread of a messaging channel as the record, not only for them to know the context and where the user is, but also for the user to continue where they left off. Expecting the user to kind of like go into a website and spend like 20 minutes browsing and selecting all the products and finishing a purchase without going elsewhere is nuts at this point in time. We're like jumping in between apps all of the time. So being able to keep that thread inside of a messaging app really creates this sort of omni-channel type of experience where you maintain context and where users can continue where they left off.
Great. And tying that into what that means from an enterprise brand perspective, there's this quote from Forbes that resonated quite a bit, where it said that no matter the industry, product, customer, or size, the company's brand is its single most important asset. Your brand isn't just your logo; it's how you interact with the world, all the way from your customers to your employees. It all stems from the brand. And I think the ability for startups as well as enterprises to leverage these data platforms to truly build those human connections is, in a way, helping shape the brand that we're creating for the company, that the enterprises are creating for themselves. It would be great, Javi, to get your perspective in terms of how are these automation and data platforms helping in that brand building, especially in a digital world where we may not always be in that face-to-face communication. And for the startups that are listening in as well, like how is this relevant for startups themselves, either if they're selling to enterprises some of these platforms or as they're looking to build their own brand?
Absolutely. I think that the brand is nothing more than how your customers experience you. And ultimately, it's all the different touch points that an end user or a customer will have with your company. So just like culture, a lot of the times is not what you say, is what you do, right? It's the same thing for a brand. And what these intelligent data platforms allow you to do is to really define your voice, define what type of experience you would like to give to your users, define the tempo, the tone that you would like to do that engagement, and then program it into a system so that it can recreate and extend that. Ideally, if we go back in time and we think about how we used to buy, and I think it's what customers nowadays are longing, we used to go into a small shop. The small shop would know us by our name. They would probably know our family. They would probably know the name of our mother. This type of personal connection existed back in the day when commerce started, and that's what really generated trust with this type of companies. And you would keep on coming back to that corner store because they had this connection with you, and they would treat you in a way that was consistent with who that person, who that owner of that shop was, and consistent with the values of that particular company and how would they deliver, but also had this level of personalization. You felt that it was unique to you. If you were to go and buy like fruits and vegetables, they would typically like put some extra fruit or like extra vegetables in your bag on your way out. And then they would remember about like special events, right? And as we moved into digitizing, a lot of these parts have been lost. And we sort of move into like a standardized way of getting access to all of these products. And nowadays, it's not really about the supply. It's about demand. It's about standing out from your competition. Think, especially for startups, all of the companies are fighting to get attention and to really set themselves as different, because the ways of producing a product right now have been democratized, and really anyone can sort of create anything at this point. So what really differentiates you is that experience that you're able to give, and there's a longing for that, especially now in the times of that we're living, as we're going through COVID, right? And we sort of not only are spending all of our time in front of a computer and interacting, we're doing that with brands. We're no longer going out and performing a lot of the activities that we want to do. We long that connection a lot. And given that we're longing that connection and we are longing feeling special and unique and having that back and forth interaction, we a lot of the times are not optimizing for efficiency. Efficiency alone doesn't cut it, but you want some extra edge. You want some experience that makes it unique. And what these intelligent data platforms allow you to do is to exactly create that. Not only in an automated way, by the way, you can also augment humans. So for all of the tasks that might need to be automated, such as follow-ups, how you would send like a message to a user, to a base, you don't need a person kind of like creating each of the campaigns and selecting what type of messages to send to your users. That is something that an intelligent data platform can do. And also providing information about the products, going a back and forth in a negotiation that you have programmed. But for certain employees or every so often, for certain customers or every so often, what you can do is route the conversation to one of your specialists and engage in one of these conversations. We have been doing this with retailers where we're providing assisted sales. And the results that we have seen are incredible from two angles. One is the increase in the conversion rate, that just by having that extra layer, as you go browsing to a site and you might have questions about a particular item, just being able to pop up that bubble of a chat and engage in a conversation, filter that through a virtual assistant. But if you see that there are like further conversations that might require a specialist, route that conversation into a person that really understands that, and then enter and provide some advice. And we have seen all sorts of conversations inside of the platform around people sharing photos of their living room to see if the television would fit in well, telling about what type of events they want to do, for what type of movies they want to like be using the TV. All of these like personal details are being shared, and that can be stored in the intelligent data platform from one end, but from the other end, all of that information can at the first time be used by one of your specialists to really provide a really good recommendation when it comes to buying. And we have seen the conversion rate of those sites go up between 3 and 4x once you start enabling this type of connections. And the recurrence in the purchase start going up because it starts building that bond. And then the other thing that we also found fascinating is that a lot of these specialists that are coming on into the platform and providing this assisted sales are previous retail salespersons. So as some of these stores close, they have repurposed their sales force into being virtual salespeople or virtual assistants. And when they're providing that advice through that, they're a lot more productive and they're able to close a lot more sales. So it's a win-win from both sides. And this is just an example of how you can extend your brand and showing that you can use part of automation and ML to do that, but you can also augment a human to provide those type of unique experiences.
That's awesome. And when does it become too much? Like, do you have maybe a tip or an advice of the traps or the loopholes to avoid when the data can be misused, and how do you protect against that?
Yes, I think it's super important, and I think a lot of the times we rush as companies into the technology without thinking what is the problem we're trying to solve. So I would say the first and sometimes non-obvious part is to really think about what type of experience you want to create for your end users, what type of experience you want your brand to be about, to really understand what type of problem you're solving, and then from there build backwards. A lot of the times you have no idea the amount of times we have gone into certain engagements where it just goes to the technology and how can we automate all of this. And sometimes it's like you don't really need to automate this part. Like, how about automating all of these like frequent questions that you're getting instead of a critical process where you're adding a lot of value right now and you're having very little volume. So it's about identifying what are those wins and where does it make more sense to bring some automation, where does it make more sense to bring some augmentation of humans from that part. So really thinking about the problem is super essential, and what type of experience you want to give. The second part is the data. So 90% if you would ask like any AI engineer, like where do they spend most of their time is like massaging and playing with the data, and not so much on the algorithm part. And the reason for that is because having good data is key in terms of really being able to leverage this intelligent data platform. So having a good strategy for how you're going to be storing information about the users, their behaviors, and thinking that before you push into production any of the new features and how that is going to be consistent as you keep on moving forward is key in this part. So not having data as an afterthought, especially for the startups, it can work in that way where basically you build everything and then after you build it, you start thinking, oh, okay, how am I going to extract data out of this? And that's where the mess typically starts happening. So thinking data first, knowing what type of experience, what problem, but then really making a good data architecture for how you're going to be saving those type of information is going to be essential, and it's going to save you from a lot of future trouble in that, especially as you grow bigger and as you start getting that data, it becomes one of your most valuable assets. And if it's not properly organized, then you're not going to be able to leverage these data platforms. And the last tip that I would put here is start small, go like one part of the experience at a time, and really be agile around that. I cannot emphasize enough, this is especially relevant for enterprises, right? Where sometimes having too many resources can play against this type of strategies and try to do everything at once. And the reality is that sometimes you don't have all of the data to solve all of the problems at once. So prioritizing and choosing which one to focus first and then going into the others one by one is A, going to allow you to move a lot faster, but B, is going to generate new insights so that you can build better the next parts of your solution. So as you're thinking about an intelligent data platform, you want to keep that in mind. Like really think about the experience, the problem that you're trying to solve. Think about the data and not have that as an afterthought of what is going to happen, but really think about it first. And then start small, really prioritize what type of the experience you want to automate and you want to enhance with this type of software, and take it from there.
Awesome. This is incredibly helpful. And Javi, just to wrap up, one final question before the end of the session is if you had one prediction to make on how intelligent data platforms is going to change how we communicate or how we operate in the next decade? What do you think that's going to be?
Wow. So in the next decade, I don't know if we're still going to be full humans at the pace of things. I think sometimes it's hard to think exponentially, right? Because we don't see how these changes are happening and are going. Just 10 years ago, think about messaging apps. It wasn't that widespread. So to think about what's going to happen from a conversational commerce perspective in the next 10 years, it's quite difficult. But what I would say there, it's in the next 5 years, right? I think in the next 5 years, we're going to look back and it's going to be one of those situations where we're going to say, I don't understand how I used to engage with businesses when I didn't do it through messaging apps. Like that would just be like normal, and we won't be able to like understand how we were engaging with businesses. And I think the second part that is going to happen in the future is that users are going to want to have, rightly so, more control over their data. So being able as a user to hold access into your data and to say what company gets access to that data and to share that data and to personalize the experience according to my needs as a user whenever I want, and to be able to take it away whenever I want, is also going to be a key component of how we go into conversational commerce. And the third part of this is that there's going to be an aggregation that happens, right? Right now, we're engaging with multiple brands at the same time. I think as we move forward, there's going to be a flock of having these super assistants that allow you to talk to only one assistant, one intelligent data platform, and then connecting to all sorts of businesses from there. So that's a bit of how we're seeing the conversational commerce space evolving.
This is definitely very exciting, and I completely echo the comments that you made. Is when we look back, we don't obviously wonder how we ever did things before, which was also the case. I mean, now with messaging apps, where back in the day it was mainly voice communication, like what phones were used for, and now texting seems to be the only thing that people use their phones for. So it's definitely an interesting evolution, and it's great to see the transition out from the B2C kind of a messaging workflow into a B2B messaging workflow, where now enterprises can run their sales, marketing, inventory, distribution, logistics, all of those workflows on top of messaging platforms, create all of the intelligent data to create those human connections. Ali, this was a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I'm hoping that the audience got to learn more about how to create these data platforms, what are some of the traps to avoid. The advice that you shared has been incredibly helpful. So thank you again, and thank you to Startup Grind for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Rashmi. It's been a pleasure sharing with the audience here. We cannot see them, right? Which is weird that we would have that, but it's really nice. It's definitely super exciting what's happening inside of the intelligent data platforms. And Rashmi, if I can just ask you one final question around this, because I know there are a lot of startup founders listening at this point. Kind of what are some of the things that you would recommend for a startup as they're going from startup to scale up to think about, given that you focus a lot on growth stage? What are some of the typical pitfalls that you see there, and what would you recommend for companies that are going through those stages?
Yeah, so I think, Javi, we covered some of that during the discussion. One is really being crisp around what is the problem that, as a startup, you're trying to address, being really good and focused in solving that particular pain point before you try and grow and expand into other areas. The second is the market is evolving really quickly. And so how do you future-proof your product and your offerings to make sure that what you're building today is going to be relevant and is going to address needs 3 to 5 years from there? So painting that vision for your investors in terms of why that matters and why that's going to matter going forward is important. And the third, I would say, beyond a doubt, is execution. The numbers speak for themselves. And as you continue to grow, add more customers, show efficient growth, there's going to be investors that are going to be excited and would want to partner alongside of the companies in those journeys. That itself is a topic. So I'm sure we can spend 2 hours discussing those.
For sure. Yes, I think unfortunately we ran out of time here. We could go 4 hours, but thank you so much, Rashmi. This has been great.
Great. Well, thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate the time today and enjoy the rest of the session.
Thank you so much.